Why should I care about DevOps? DevOps is ridiculously important. And remember, DevOps is the union of people, process, and products to enable the continuous delivery of value to our end users. Now, once again, the most important step here, or point here, is we need to be able to continuously deliver value. So why is it so important for us to continuously deliver value? Well, the speed of business today is so freaking fast that we have to be able to continuously deliver value to be able to keep up with the changes, with everything that's happening. So here's the key concept that you have to remember. If you are not implementing DevOps best practices, your competitors either have or they will, and when they do, they will absolutely out-innovate you. And this isn't just DevOps theory. We've been doing DevOps long enough where we know this is fact. So why is DevOps important? Because you have to continuously deliver value. If you don't, you will be out-innovated, and if you get out-innovated, you become obsolete. And none of us wants to be obsolete.
Hey everybody, my name is Jay Gordon. Welcome back to AzureFunBytes. I really am so happy you are here. I want to talk about that video for a second before I kind of get into things. There's a person whose information will never be obsolete. I think that Abel brings so much, or brought so much amazing information and a really tremendous spirit to the DevOps community. And I'm sure that we'll talk a little bit more about him. But I just wanted to always say that, Abel was a really special person. And I always like seeing that video because I like to keep that legacy going because he helped build something really great with us. And I don't think anybody wants to forget who he was. So welcome back to AzureFunBytes. My name, like I said, is Jay Gordon. And every week, what do? We get together and we talk about the people, the process, the tools, the things that make an amazing Azure experience. And this week, we're going to talk a little bit about DevOps, something that's near and dear to my heart, something that I really always enjoy having conversations about. It's a very, very complex subject that people have tons of opinions on. And we'll talk a little bit about those opinions. We'll talk a little bit about what DevOps is and how it is. But before we get into that, I'd like to bring in this week's guest, and it's none other than April Edwards. Hi, April. How are you today?
Hey, Jay. How you doing? I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
I'm great. I'm really glad we got these matching shirts today. I think it really fits the theme of what we're talking about today.
Absolutely.
And so I'm really happy you're here because you do so much great work around DevOps. And I really found that, since we started working together, which we're on the same team, I've got to learn a lot about your knowledge, what's important to you, and all the big ideas. So thank you so much.
Hey, thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Great. So before we kind of get into everything, I wanted to kind of just bring up some stuff first before we start. We've got a poll. We have a poll every single week. And what do we do in this poll? We ask the question. And this week, our question is, how do you think of DevOps as cultural or technical? And so you can go to aka.ms/learntv and answer the question. It could be both. You'll let us know. We'd really like to hear what your thoughts are. And if you scroll down on the right side, you'll see that there are a bunch of links for today's show. If you go, you check out the links, you'll get lots of documentation, some videos, some great info about how to get started using DevOps on Azure. Of course, there are some great things like the DevOps Resource Center we'll talk a little bit about later. And we'll also be talking about, Microsoft Learn and how to get started with DevOps in the DevOps learning path. So I think we got a jam-packed show for you. But before we kind of get into that, April, I want to learn a little bit more about you. And that's one of my big things that I like to do to kick off this show because we've got so much time and we're going to burn through it. But before we start burning through that time, I'd like to ask you the burning question I always ask everybody. So how'd you get here?
In a very, very wiggly line. I actually started with an ops background many, many years ago, over 20 plus years ago in the industry. And that ages myself a little bit. But I worked with ops teams. I was, building stuff in operational environments. And I went to university and said, oh, I'm going to go be a doctor. That didn't pan out because I decided I liked tech better, and I stayed in tech. And I traveled all around the world with my job, brought me over here to the UK, over from the US. Now I work for Microsoft. And in the last few years, I've done some incredible things at Microsoft. I was a guest with Abel on Channel 9 about 2.5 years ago, which was an incredible experience. He even invited me back, which was even better. And then I started doing a lot more work with Abel and yourself and the whole DevOps team. And because I was working in a developer environment with engineering at Microsoft. So I was seeing the developer side and the operational side. And when I was talking to customers and we were architecting solutions in Azure, like DevOps was part of the foundations of what we were trying to do and what we were trying to deliver to customers, and especially what we're trying to deliver in Azure.
Yeah, and DevOps is in everything when it comes to delivering software nowadays. It's very, very difficult to not have DevOps, whether you're building with Java, you're working with just infrastructure deployments. DevOps is kind of like a critical part of the process because you look beyond just where that wall is that used to exist, and we'll talk a little bit about that wall in a second. So thank you so much for that little intro. I really appreciate it. And so, like we keep saying, today's subject of the day is DevOps. And so we'll kind of start asking this question. And we'll go off this definition that I really think is really succinct. DevOps is a union of people, process, and products to enable continuous delivery of value to your end users. Donovan Brown coined that. I know you and I really, really always appreciate what Donovan has to say because it's extremely thoughtful. And so DevOps helps accelerate delivery all the way through the process, starting all the way until you get to the process of monitoring. And so what does it all mean is that we're looking to deliver value. We're looking to increase efficiency, eliminate waste. We want to streamline our feedback loop. We want to continuously improve, always. We want to deliver our software faster. And ultimately, we want our customers to be happier. And so by kind of creating this environment, we can really help make our customers understand we're building something for them. I think that's ultimately what we're going for. And it's not just a myth. It's not just an idea. It's working. The Dora report, I think really, and this is one from 2019, really kind of put it all together because high performance DevOps companies, they achieve developer velocity. So there's 106 times faster commit to deploy, 2,604 faster incident recoveries, which incident recovery, huge part,
Massive.
7 times lower change failure rate, and 208 times more frequent deployments. And what does that mean? It means faster time to market and increased revenue, more money. So you can add more developers, more engineers, more DevOps people so that you can keep the process moving along. And people and culture is such a huge part of all this because DevOps is about breaking down the wall of confusion that's existed in IT operations for the longest time. Dev was always on one side, ops was always on the other, and they would normally come to a head very, very often. They would bang heads trying to make decisions on how things would work. They would bang heads on incidents and who was responsible for fixing those incidents. And that kind of led into our modern SRE, site reliability engineering culture that also exists. And we could talk a little bit about that and observability and monitoring, maybe if we get some time for today. And so process is just so key because what we're doing is we're creating a process that exists from the beginning of our development. So the planning, the development phase, the delivery phase, and then eventually once we get to production, the operations phase. And that's, like I said, monitoring observability, making sure that we know after we've delivered or what exactly is going on. And so, like I said, DevOps is about delivering value. So that's, implementing lean ideals and sprints, agile, all that really is a big part. We're doubling down on delivery. We're continuously improving. So we're learning from what we've done, and we're trying to improve upon it so that we're always striving for greatness, greater reliability, by creating tests, having the proper monitoring in place, having automated processes to check security. It gives us greater reliability and ultimately gives our customers a greater sense of respect for the work that's being done. And then we're putting things in a backlog if we need to, so that we can know what work has to be accomplished. And through that, we can then prioritize what work has to be accomplished. And so I think all this really gets us to the big idea that I was talking about before, April, and that's delivering value. And so there are tools and processes and ideas that really encompass DevOps. But I really think that you've got some great information on some of that tooling. And I'd love to kind of hear from you a bit about that if you want to go ahead. And I know you got some stuff ready for us to show, and I'd love to take a look.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So I think, when you talked about delivering value, and we're going to talk a lot about delivering value because we want to deliver value, but we want to be all delivering the right value. And you said it, we've all been there as an ops person and a developer. We hand things off. We blame the other side. And that culture change is really, really difficult. So the culture change is the hardest part, but we all need to make sure we're delivering that same value. So I want to talk about the ops side a little bit because, the ops side has probably the most changes to undergo when embracing DevOps. When you're a developer, you use these tools that help you deploy your code and help you be a bit more agile, and you work in sprints. So when you work with an ops team and go, we're going to start talking about infrastructure as code, and your infrastructure is now code, and it changes the mindset. And Abel talked about it. We don't want to become obsolete. So when we talk about moving to Azure, a lot of customers would get really nervous and say, I'm going to be out of a job. And I said, no, hold on, you're not out of a job. What happens is your role's changing. And when we start talking about infrastructure as code, as an ops person, that's something that is a great first step to start learning in the cloud and automation. And infrastructure as code is really managing your entire infrastructure in a descriptive model using version control to store your files. And as an operational person, you're going, what the heck is version control? So there's a bit of a learning curve, but we can get around that. So we're going to talk a little bit about why infrastructure as code today, and why it's important. Now, infrastructure as code, we talked about the DevOps stuff, like all the benefits DevOps brings. An infrastructure as code, model, infrastructure becomes your code. It's no longer just building hardware anymore. And people that are using on-prem hardware, virtual machines, or even physical servers, you can still use infrastructure as code. You can still automate. This isn't Azure specific, but we are going to refer to Azure mostly today. And most of our customers are in a hybrid environment. And that's the real world. And when we start looking at infrastructure as code, we're looking at how to store code. So think of you as maybe a sysadmin or an IT pro, and you've automated something. It could be a simple PowerShell script or whatever it may be, and it sits on your machine. Let's say you go on vacation, go on holiday, and the script doesn't run. Or if the script runs, but you had to do a little bit of a manual intervention to get something to work, and it breaks everything. I've been in that situation before where someone's gone on vacation, they had a script running, and it caused kind of a red herring in our infrastructure, and we had to find it. So it's learning to use things like why we want to use repositories and source code repositories, so we can share our code and contribute and work together and not just hoard our code, right? And then we start looking at continuous integration and continuous delivery with our infrastructure, so that if something does break, we're not running to find backup tapes that are stored somewhere and that may or may not work. We can just redeploy our infrastructure when and where possible. We can version everything. And when we version things, we can see when a change was made. So it wasn't just someone, going and pointing and clicking and making a change. We know when something changes, and that's really important. And it's scalable. A lot of organizations, do one thing with infrastructure as code, but now we have a whole infrastructure, a whole environment to maintain. And we can put governance around that. So in a time where you give someone administrator access and say, yeah, go do all these things, we can now govern and have traceability and have a lot more control of what people can access and what they can't. And on the right side of the screen here, I have just a little Terraform template and an ARM template, just a little bit of a screenshot. And I think the hardest thing when you start looking at infrastructure as code is we move from a pet versus a cattle model. Now, I have built server environments where I took a lot of time to name my servers. And I think, Jay, you've been there as well. You're like,
oh,
you know what?
Absolutely. We all have all had like that sci-fi or something related server that we call 01-prod or something like that.
Yeah, and I've sat there, and I used to live in Boston, and Boston is known for really good beer. And one of my customers named all their servers after one of the microbreweries. So we had like Harpoon, Sam Adams, Wachusett Brew. Like we actually named the servers off of a brewing company. So there was a lot of TLC, right? We fed and watered these things, and as an IT pro, you're really attached to that. But we have to start thinking as a cattle. It's a disposable thing. If it breaks, fine, we redeploy it. And changing that mentality is hard. It is very hard. And that's where that culture change really is difficult. But we can say, right, this broke, we can redeploy it. We can maintain it a little bit differently. We can scale things a lot better as well. So there's all those benefits when we start going into that cattle model. And when we start talking about the tooling to do this, right? When you log into Azure, Jay, you build something in the portal, what's the first thing you see that you can kind of extract to get infrastructure as code templates with?
ARM templates, you can export them as, like, even if you go and you start clicking you can export that into an ARM template. And then I know that there's a lot of great tutorials that we have on the docs page or docs site. They actually give you either ARM templates or also bicep templates.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can go into the portal, get an ARM template, and that's where a lot of us started in Azure. That's where I started in Azure, is exporting that ARM template. I personally do not love ARM templates. I've grown to kind of like them more than I used to, but I think Bicep is phenomenal. It's much more readable. And I think the feedback from the community is really good. So Bicep is another form as well. And you're right. We have whole repositories where you can just get the code and start building stuff from scratch.
And I want to plug something for you. You did this level up your Bicep skills on Microsoft Learn session on the DevOps Lab. And if you haven't been to the DevOps Lab yet, there's a lot of great sessions that you can find. There's some really great videos. We'll get you a link to that in just a little bit. So I am going to obviously take this back because I want you to continue what you have to say, because it's been so interesting so far.
Cool. And yeah, I'll just add on to that. We've had a whole infrastructure as code series. So tune into the DevOps Lab. You can see the videos. There's also some blog posts about it, but some great tutorials of how to get started. And you know, tying into that, you know, when you look at tooling, we have the Azure command line, right? The CLI, and PowerShell. I'm a massive PowerShell fan. And I have worked with people that were very open source focused and were like, don't want to touch PowerShell, right? PowerShell has become a very much cross-functional tool, and it is awesome to automate things.
And it's become more available also.
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
The fact that there are Linux binaries, there's Mac binaries. You're not just kind of gated into Windows.
Exactly. And that's why they changed the name away from Windows PowerShell. So I'm a big PowerShell fan. And then where I really fell in love with infrastructure as code is Terraform. And again, there's some videos on Channel 9. I've written blogs about it. Terraform was easy for me to learn. And when I was working with operational teams and we're like, right, we're going to do this Azure thing, we're going to do this infrastructure as code thing, Terraform made it easy. Terraform's also really cool because you can use it across multiple environments. Meaning if you're sitting in Azure, AWS, GCP, or on-prem, you can write scripts for all those environments. You can't use the same script because you're calling different providers, but you can reuse that type of code. So it's agnostic to wherever you're deploying it. And that's why I love Terraform.
And that's one of the critical parts of using infrastructure as code is that reusability. I think like if you build something, you shouldn't have to reinvent the wheel every single time, especially if you're talking about like multiple environments. You should be able to just modify some parameters in order to continue developing, say, development environments, QA, production, you name it. Being able to use like one type of template that's just kind of modular by putting in, all right, I need this for my development model. I need this for production. It just makes it a lot easier for the people who are actually putting together the infrastructure.
Absolutely. And I think it's fairly easy to learn. If you don't have a lot of experience writing code, Terraform's easy to read because it's written in a language called HCL, which is human readable language. And it's based off of Go on the back end, and it's a super easy to learn tool. And then we have a lot of other tools, right? We have Pulumi. Pulumi is great because if you are a developer and you have a language that you prefer, maybe C#, et cetera, you can write your infrastructure as code with Pulumi in whatever language you prefer. And that one's been a lot diverse. Also, Pulumi has kind of what we call day zero support. So as soon as something's released in Azure, you can deploy it with Pulumi. Whereas with Terraform, we need to get the provider written. So if something is in preview, you don't always see the provider to be able to create those resources. So it's a little bit of a frustrating thing, but Pulumi is pretty good. Again, Bicep and ARM templates, as soon as something's available in Azure, it's natively built into that. And there's other things like Chef, Ansible, and Puppet, which are really, really popular. Ansible also manages the infrastructure and the day-to-day stuff. So, your kind of your desired state as well. And I think something that's really important to kind of, when people go, well, which one do I choose? You really have to choose what's best for you and your organization. What skill levels are you working with? Where are you deploying to? And then you have imperative versus declarative languages. So with an imperative language, you have to give everything, if you think of it methodically, step by step, and it's like a recipe, and your infrastructure as code will deploy with that. With declarative, you just say, this is what I want my end state to be. And that's why Terraform actually was also really easy, in my opinion. You say, right, this is what I want you to build, and it goes and it does it. It's not perfect 100% of the time, but there's caveats and gotchas to every, language, but it's pretty spot on, right? You can say, this is what I want. And that declarative difference versus imperative makes a big difference for people deciding how they want to use things. And some people really like Ansible because they have to manage the day-to-day estate as well on top of it. And some of these tools are limited in how they can do that.
Licensing also plays a huge part in it. If you've gone ahead and you've had an engagement with Red Hat for, say, your enterprise OS, you may be more inclined to use Ansible. If you're doing a multi-platform type of deployment that you also need to do across multiple clouds and maybe on-prem, Chef or Puppet may make the most sense because you'll be able to say, all right, I need these Windows servers, these Linux servers, and I need them all in this place and this place. And so some things that people need to remember is ARM and Bicep, those are Azure specific.
Yeah.
Bicep is a domain-specific language. It is to create ARM templates, but in a far easier syntax. And then when you're looking at Terraform, Pulumi, like April mentioned, like these are giving you some of the same flexibility as, say, what Chef, Puppet, and Ansible are, but they're really cloud forward. They tend to be extremely cloud forward and really want you to get the most out of your cloud solutions by giving you ways to build it, and like I said, in a multi-platform type of way.
Absolutely. And I think, with any of these, you have to get started. You need a starting point. And I think, Jay, you have the website up for NubesGen. I'm going to plug a little bit about NubesGen. NubesGen is a homegrown product out of Microsoft. And what it is, it's a way for you to kickstart your project within a few minutes. So you literally go in there and click the blue button where it says create your project infrastructure now. And you just pick what you want to deploy. It doesn't deploy everything in infrastructure, but it gets you starter templates. And it has security built in. It has best practices. You choose the sizing you want, what applications, where you want to deploy to, and it spits out Terraform templates for you. So there are absolutely some great repositories online that Microsoft manages and HashiCorp manage for getting started, but this does it for you. So you can go, right, I need Key Vault, I need to deploy some blob, and I need GitOps, I'm going cloud native. I need a database. You just tick the box and it just spits it out for you. And there's, it's a great way to get started. And I believe it's going to be doing Bicep soon as well. But it helps people get started when they go, where do I start? Because I think getting started is probably the hardest thing, to find a script, find a use case. And I always tell people start small. When I did my Terraform on Azure demo, I literally deployed a resource group, then deployed a server into it. And then I went and did a scale set. I showed just some really easy stepping stones, and you start small and you can build stuff a little bit bigger. right? And you don't take on a massive new project and go, I'm going to write this massive script, whether it's a Bicep, ARM, you're using Pulumi or Ansible or PowerShell or Terraform, doesn't matter. Start with a bite-sized chunk, right? Start small, build on top of it, learn the language, learn how it works, because each of these tools have caveats and gotchas. They're all great tools, but nothing is 100%. They all have their issues, or different ways of working, I should say. So you just have to figure those out.
And that really is a big idea around DevOps in general, is that you want to start small. You want to start bringing in different components of what you're doing, one thing at a time. You don't necessarily want to jump all in. I want to show everybody real quick the template that was created right here. So by using NubesGen, you can see I was able to get a Terraform template created with lots and lots of information about me having a module for a storage blob, key vault that will be created, Cosmos DB. So it gives you a really complete set of tools to be able to start doing your web development.
Absolutely. And the team has an open source contribution to it. I've worked with the team as well, and we want to make sure that security is in play. When we talk about DevOps, we want to put security in from day one. We have this phrase in DevOps we use called shifting left. And Jay, you spoke about doing things early and often. And when we shift left, it means doing things in that planning phase. We need to put that security in, because we've all been in that project where we deploy something, security person goes running in the room going, what about security? And you're going, yes, about that, right? And you're backpedaling a bit. So it's getting that security in. It's using modules and Terraform templates, using the correct configuration. It plays against the CAF model that we have, the Cloud Adoption Framework model. So we're building out things the right way. It's a good best practice way to get started. The team's put a ton of effort into it. They're putting a ton of new features into it. So if you're looking to get started, it is, yes, Terraform bias at the minute, but I do encourage everyone to go have a look at it. There is a video series on Channel 9. And shifting left, pushing quality upstream. And throwing out facts and figures. Like, we have hard stats, Jay, that you mentioned on DevOps. When we try to fix an issue in production, we incur over 460 times the cost as if we did in development in that planning phase. So those are really things that an organization looks at the IT spend and goes, well, you're spending all this money. What are we getting out of it? So look at things, doing things early and often saves on that cost. And that's why that increased revenue and increased value really drives it over the line.
Yeah, and I like how this shifting left page that we have up on the Azure website, or I should say the Docs website, it gives you some real hard statistics, some numbers, 27,000 legacy tests, and you can see that execution of tests along the process, I think, also really helps with the idea of shifting left, and as well as implementing automation, so that we kind of are moving forward all the time and not necessarily always working manually. We have things and tools to make sure that it makes sense. So we've talked about all the different tooling. We've talked a lot about how the DevOps kind of comes together. The thing that I'd like to ask you, and maybe I can get your take on it, is what is DevOps culture in your definition?
DevOps culture. Well, I don't know if I want to put a definition to it. I don't want to, overdo what Donovan's done in his time. But no, the DevOps culture is being able to be. It's a growth mindset, and it's something we have here at Microsoft. So it's always wanting to learn and to grow. And when you have the process in your culture to say, we're going to work in this process, it's willing to learn and say we need to do things better the next time around. And actually, Abel and I sat there one time and joked about DevOpsing our own lives, right? We failed fast, but it's, knowing you made an error and being able to address it and fix it. And it's also having a blameless culture. And so when something does break, and something is going to break, it's about saying, let's do better next time. How do we fix it? And it's working together as a team. And, we talk about this at Microsoft. I give a lot of talks on how Microsoft does DevOps within their engineering teams. I'm actually giving this talk Saturday in the UK at a live in-person event. And I'm talking about the Microsoft DevOps story, how we embrace it as a company. We had to change how our teams are structured. We had to change our mindsets and have a growth mindset. And we had to have a customer obsessed culture, and everything had to be a production ready mindset. So when we're developing code or infrastructure as code, it has to be production ready. So that means, you have the security in place, you have all the tooling you need, you have testing in place, you have all those things you need in place from day one.
Absolutely. So super, super important. So I'm going to ask you another question. I hope that's okay. And I think that it may lead into some really cool demo time. So GitHub Actions versus Azure DevOps pipelines. These are release processes, if you will, ways to actually do deployments. Which one is better, or which one should I use, or how do people know which one to use?
And we get these questions all the time. So I think the best answer is it depends. It depends on what the requirements are of the organization. So I'm going to go through and actually everyone loves a picture, show a deployment scenario here where we're a high functioning DevOps team. So we've talked about infrastructure as code, but what does that look like in deployment side, right? What does that look like in Azure? So we have our engineer here and we have our planning phase, and we're using something like Azure DevOps, the tool. Azure DevOps, the tool, and we're using Azure boards. We're doing our planning. We're giving visibility to the senior leadership team about what we're doing, and all the developers, engineers are planning out their sprints. They're developing their code in tools like Visual Studios, and in this case, they're using Azure repos. Now, the big advantage of Azure repos is it sits in your Azure tenant, so it's tied to your Active Directory. And when there are data residency requirements from an organization, Azure repos usually wins out. When I worked in engineering, we used Azure repos on every single customer project because of data residency. We were working on very important projects, and GitHub didn't have the data residency we needed for the UK or Europe, so we had to use it. But then, we talked about our phases, right? So we're planning, we're developing, we're delivering, and we're using Azure DevOps pipelines, and that's our CI/CD mechanism. And that could be deploying to Azure virtual machines. We could even put an arrow here and go into a customer's on-prem environment or into another cloud. Maybe they're split between two clouds. I've worked with a lot of customers like that. Doesn't matter where they're delivering to, they're using the tooling to deliver it. And there's a culture change. The culture has to be ready to say, we're going to plan, we're going to develop our code, we're going to deliver it. And then the big thing is we can't just throw it out there. And one of the things we do at Microsoft and the engineering teams is we own what we've deployed in production. So we own that. And that creates a lot of empathy in your team. That's a massive cultural change. So when we're looking at the operations day to day, in this instance, we have application insights. That's giving monitoring around the solution, giving us logs, analytics, feedback, and we know how everything's performing. So we know that what we deployed, is it delivering value or is it not? Because whatever you're using for your monitoring tools needs to do that for you. So that's an Azure DevOps example. I'm going to go to the other side of the fence, and I'm going to use more of GitHub. So yeah, I mean, why not? We love both, right? And we have customers that use both. And we have customers that have their code sit in GitHub repositories, but then deploy with Azure DevOps. They integrate really well together. So, again, we're in our planning phase, and we're using GitHub, our source controls in GitHub. We could be using Azure boards integrate into that, or we could be doing our planning in GitHub. There are so many great new features coming out in GitHub. You can use issues to raise things, et cetera, and have full visibility of what needs to change in the environment for your planning and everything. Now, GitHub doesn't have the planning tools that Azure DevOps does. So if the planning tools are super critical using the Azure DevOps boards, that's something that currently lacks in GitHub. Now, they're bringing up a lot of feature parity in GitHub, but there isn't that capability. So it really depends on what's best for the organization. So in this instance, we're going cloud native with AKS. And again, this could be multiple environments as well. We're going to develop our code using Visual Studio Code. We could be using something like a dev container, running local testing within our VS Code environments. And then we're delivering that. And we could deliver that through pipelines, Azure pipelines, or GitHub Actions. GitHub Actions are that capability. Now, in this image, we talk about CI/CD pipelines, but I mentioned GitHub Actions. And GitHub Actions do more than just CI/CD. So when we're talking about automation and delivering things to Azure, we can automate almost anything with Actions. And that's the advantage Actions has over Azure pipelines. And we still have monitoring. So we've hooked in monitoring the final step of this. Again, we need that feedback. So we have telemetry. We know how our containers are doing. We have real-time log analytics. These are all things that are massively critical to knowing the whole phase, that plan, develop, deliver, and operational phase. And so we can show people how to do it. And now we have a lot of architectural references on Microsoft as well. And we reference these a lot on the DevOps Lab because it's one way of doing it. It's not the only way. It is certainly one way of doing it. And there's, again, if people have invested into other tools like Jenkins or Octopus Deploy, these also integrate into Azure. So you don't always just have to use Azure Pipelines or GitHub Actions.
Yeah, I definitely remember what I like to call the bad old days of Jenkins. Not that what you use is bad, but they were bad times for me. Very, very difficult. I really do appreciate the way GitHub Actions and Azure Pipelines works, because I think that by utilizing simple kind of process, Jenkins has a lot of moving parts, especially if you're running your own Jenkins. And whereas like with using Azure DevOps or GitHub Actions, you have this kind of unified place that all the parts are there. So the repos, in Azure DevOps, you have Kanban boards, which is really great for planning. You can create automation. And one of the other things that I really like is how Microsoft Teams can even play in, so that you can use Teams to send updates, or you can get updates via Teams when you do things like update a pull request in GitHub, which is going to then eventually kick off a deployment. If you've got everything set up where, you're using GitHub Actions, where it sees a change and says, okay, you pushed to main, let's go ahead and kick off a deployment process.
Absolutely. And I think the integration into Teams is important, because when you're working on a project, you need visibility. And we talk about, the 4 cycles of DevOps, but the visibility, again, when someone pushes a change. And, I think the biggest use case I see, and this is from my experience, you get a request from somewhere in the organization to make a change. And someone comes up and taps you on the shoulder and like, excuse me, when's this done? And they wanted it done yesterday. They bug you every 5 minutes for the change to be done. You're like, chill out, hold on, I'm working on it. Then you break something or something happens or whatever. You got to get it done. And having that visibility across the organization, across the stakeholders, the project team is super critical. And GitHub Actions GitHub hooks into Teams so well. And also Azure DevOps does as well. So I have a repository in my GitHub, actually, when I make any changes, whether it's a pull request or I open an issue, I get a message straight into a Teams channel. So if you're on the project team or the marketing team asks you to make a change on a website, they can make the request in an issue. They can see the issue's been opened. They can see who it's been assigned to. They can see who's working on it, and they can see where it is in the phase of the development cycle. So that transparency across the organization is really critical to keeping those people tapping you on the shoulder at bay, but also letting the organization know and set those realistic expectations of where things are. And communication is huge. And, sometimes we're not always, as humans, we're not always good at communication because we forget. We're so into our code. We're so into doing something. So by having that automated system, it takes off that burden from me as a developer. And here's an update. I've gone into, I've deployed into our development environment. I've deployed into our pre-production or production. Like, they can see the whole journey of the code we're developing.
Awesome. So we got about 20 minutes left. And I wanted to give you an opportunity, if you'd like, to I know you've got some stuff to show me. We've done a lot of talking. I know that you built a tutorial out not so long ago to publish Azure Static Web Apps with Azure DevOps. I know that really can help people kind of create reasonably simple workflows in order to have things like their Jamstack applications published. So you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me pull that up. So let's think of the problem here, or what we're trying to solve. So we are an organization. We have a bunch of servers that host some websites. And when we host a website on a server, where we have the operating system, we have a big security footprint. We have to patch the operating system. We have to put on antivirus. We have firewalls to worry about, all sorts of other things. There's a lot of maintenance that goes into managing a website, and an operational team has to consider that. And every operational team's gone to your developers and go, right, we need downtime to patch. It's Patch Tuesday. We do it once a month. And developers go, no, you can't take it down because it's a critical business application. So when customers are looking to go into Azure, we have some amazing tools. So we have, let's move away from, I'm gonna upset some IT pros here, and let's move away from servers. I want to talk about platform as a service, because I'm all about transforming applications so that we lower that security footprint, we lower that maintenance, because the maintenance is what drags us down and helps us incur technical debt. So when we look at platform as a service, we have Azure Web Apps, which allow you to run a website, connect to a database, scale them, do all sorts of cool stuff. What we had before, we had Azure Storage, where you could set up a static site. So a static site is something that is static. It's not inputting really information, doesn't have a database on the back end. It could be, a simple website, a blog site, etc. A lot of organizations use static sites. Maybe they're hosting a conference or something and they just need a website up, or they're, doing some other thing. So we could get around that with a storage site. But then as Microsoft, we saw this need to create Azure Static Web Apps as a service. So it's a managed service. What's really cool about Azure Static Web Apps is it helps a consumer embrace DevOps from day one. Because when we talk about DevOps, we talk about where to start, right? We need to start small. It's still overwhelming. You're going, oh my God. And if you're using an existing application or you're going greenfield, there's all these decisions and things, and it's hard, right? DevOps can be hard to start. So I'm not going to create a static web app, but I do have the page up. What's really cool for anyone that's watching now, you can go and create an Azure Static Web App for free. So here on the plan type, it's free. Now there are limitations in what that will do. So if you're in an enterprise environment, consider the standard plan. It gives you more capability, more customization on it, but it's free. The other cool thing is when you're in the portal, if we go down here, if I click on other will allow me to hook into my repository. So let's say my website code is sitting in Azure DevOps, or maybe it's sitting in GitLab or Bitbucket, whatever. If I hit other, this allows me to deploy my static web app and hook it into my repository wherever it may sit. The other option is GitHub. So I've already authenticated all through to my GitHub. So there's secure authentication through. I set it which organization I want to hook into. I can set in my repository, and then I can see my branches and go, I want to hook into this, my main branch, etc. I can set any build presets that I might have for this. Again, if you're deploying an Angular web app or maybe a Gatsby website, etc., you can do that straight from here. Now, my code's already sitting in GitHub. If I hit review and create, it's going to pop out an Azure Static Web App for me. So I've already pre-built one for the sake of time, because I like doing demos live, but I'm also really good at breaking them. So sake of time, we've got 20 minutes left. I've built this Azure Static Web App here. In this static web app, we can see the source here is in GitHub. So if I click on this, this takes me to my main branch where my code is sitting. It also shows me the deployment history. So I've already ran this static web app. But what it does that's really cool is it gives you a workflow. Now, this is your action. So all I have to do is create my Azure Static Web App in the portal, hit yes, go create, and it automatically creates this for me. And that's so cool because I need to write a workflow because I want to put DevOps in my organization, but where do I start? So it writes a workflow that's really basic, but includes some really key things. And these are things that you can improve on, but it gives you a starting point. So this is going to get triggered on any push of my code to my main branch. If I have a branching strategy, I can pick other branches. And then if a pull request is opened off of my main branch, it's also going to trigger this workflow. So again, you can change those triggers, but this is straight out of the box. Then it sets up your jobs. And this is awesome. So it's going to give you a build and deploy job. It's saying, great, we're going to build your code, we're going to deploy it. And it takes the API token that the static web app generates and hooks into it, automatically adds it as a secret, which is really important because you don't want secrets in your code. You don't want your tokens. You don't want your passwords. Never do that.
And it creates it like an environment variable, essentially.
Exactly. That's exactly what it does. But it does it all for you there. So it pulls it through. And then it has a task for when you close the pull request. So what I want to do is I want to make some changes to our code, Jay. So I do have a website. And to prove it, I'm going to open it up here. And this is my website. And I can say, you know what? Really don't like my website, or someone comes to me and asks to change my website. We can do that. So I'm going to go into my index file that holds my code. And I'm going to make an edit. What should we change? Eeny, meeny, miny, mo. So many things to change.
You can change that. This is my app deployed. Like you can just add, I did it on AzureFunBytes or something like that. There we go.
There we go. So I made some changes to my website. I want to commit my changes. So I can just say AzureFunBytes. I can put in some other descriptions in here. I can commit this directly to my main branch, but as a good developer, I don't want to do that. I want to create a new branch and open a pull request. So I'm going to propose my changes. We don't want to create to the main branch, but I don't have a branching policy in place. So that's kind of what I'm getting. I do want to put some comments in here. I'm just going to put blah for now, and it's going to create a pull request. And this is from the code I've just done. So when it creates a pull request, again, I can add some reviewers in here. I could add UJ. I could assign myself as an assignee. And these are all things we spoke about it integrating into Teams, that updates in the Teams channel so that people can see it. You can add labels for your project. You can assign it to a certain project or a milestone or linked issues. And this is really cool. So if someone in the organization says, there's an issue on the website or the code, it links the issues to the pull request and they cross-reference each other, which is really, really cool. So as this is running, we can actually go to the details of what it's doing. It's going to do exactly as it says on the tin. It's going to run our build and deploy job as promised. It's building our Azure static web app, and it's going to run our actions. It's going to check out our code, and then it's actually going to deploy it to the static site. So I didn't have to create this workflow. It's done it for me out of the box, which I think is pretty cool.
I love it. And I love that you can watch the build right in your browser. You can see exactly what's going on. And one of the great parts about that, April, is that if what you do breaks and it doesn't build properly, it won't deploy it. It'll tell you there's a problem in the process of building. We're not going to deploy your code.
Yes, and we can already put in some basic tests. So if anyone was watching the screen, saw this really cool GitHub Actions bot come up, this is a feature built into Azure and GitHub Actions that is unique to Azure only. So if you're deploying this from another cloud provider, you won't see this. So something we want to do is we don't want to deploy to production, right? We want to protect our production environment, but we want to test our code. We want to test our changes. When I pass all my checks and all my build and deploy job, this doesn't deploy to my production site. It gives me another link here. It gives me a staging site. So if I click on this staging site, I can see that my changes have gone through. And what's really cool is we talk about traceability. We can see this -13 here matches the pull request that I just opened. So if I go back to my pull request here, it has the name, obviously, AzureFunBytes number 13. So I have traceability of what my pull request number was, and that's how it assigns the numbering on the staging slot. So it gives me the staging slot. I can test my code, and that protects my production environment, right? Now, I would not be able to do that on my own as quickly and as easily. I don't know about you.
No, and so I want to just show everybody, let's do a quick review of that workflow. So you'll have your code saying GitHub, your static site, and maybe you're going from a public directory. And where you're going from there is eventually a push. So you're pushing your code or creating a PR. And then that's kicking off a GitHub action. That action will then start your build and your deploy process and eventually bring it over so your static content is in the cloud. It gets to Azure and it gives you that opportunity to build without a ton of requirements to actually get there. So let's just kind of, I think it's a really great thing to kind of look at before we go and to the next little section. So we've got your code. You'll push it to GitHub. It'll create the CI/CD for you, so you don't have to sit and write your own YAML. It'll allow you implementation of APIs. So if you want to add a dynamic aspect to this, Azure Functions built right in where you can go ahead, you could pop in the URL for the function, execute it from, say, a portion of your website. Maybe you want to collect email addresses. Maybe you want to put stuff into a database. You can do all that. And then you can route requests from your app to your API. You can add custom SSL or custom domains and SSL, so you can have it kind of tailored. You don't have to have just that that slug that we give you, which is just a random name, authentication, so that you can add, username, passwords to get into specific sections, security roles, who can deploy, when they can deploy, how they can deploy, global scale. So that's the other great part about this is you can scale all over the world, but you don't have to worry about configuring it yourself. It's done for you on the back end. And all that comes together to serve your static website. And so I really think people are going to get a ton out of actually using the service. I know one of our fellow former cloud advocates now in the program manager role, Simona Contin, she went over and she's actually going to help people like Anthony, who have really, and Anthony's been a guest on the show before, that are really looking to like make this product bigger, get it in more people's hands, and make it easier to use. And so I think that's just tremendous, and I love that product. It's a lot of fun.
It's so awesome to get started. I've seen a lot of people in the community, because it's free, get started really easily, test this out, and they have a whole workflow going. So it's very easy to add some testing into your workflow, maybe change the triggers, but it all comes out of the box as a product, and it gives you so many more features than the other way. And it's less heavy than an Azure web app in terms of maintenance and scalability. For a static site, it's absolutely awesome with some out of the box features. And I think we're going to start seeing a lot more of the Azure resources have capability to include DevOps into what you do more easily, like this out of the box. Now we have things like the deployment center in Azure that allow you to hook in your Azure repo into Azure DevOps, GitHub Actions, or another CD mechanism. And that is there, but you're going to start seeing this out of the box from day one, just like Azure Static Web Apps. They've done such a good job with this product. And it's so cool that you get so much out of the box just from day one, because you don't get that. And you have to think where to start as an organization. So this is an easy win for so many people.
Absolutely. So we're kind of rolling towards the end. We got a few more minutes, and I want to just kind of review some of the big ideas behind DevOps and see if we got any questions, and then kind of wrap up. And so I like to always talk about CALMs, or some people call it clams, which is Jez Humble that helped write the DevOps handbook. He wrote Accelerate along with a bunch of other really great writers. And they came up with this, he came up with this really great acronym that I love to kind of always refer to. And so the first part of DevOps that you really need to consider is culture. So we're working together, we're understanding our diversity of the different skill sets that we all have, and we're taking all that potential that we all have as individuals and bringing it together, because our ability, our differences, and our experiences is our strength. Automation. We want implementation of automatic builds, tests, deployment. We want to integrate CI/CD into our entire process so that when we're working, we're not doing manual work. And I think that that's tremendous. Lean. You want to optimize your resources to ensure the fastest and most reliable outcome for your customers. So continuous improvement and respect for those who are using our product. We want to be able to build lean, work fast, work quick, deliver more. And we want to measure. We didn't get a ton of time to talk about monitoring and measuring, but great organizations, they know what they've changed and how they changed it. They know what failed, what didn't fail. So monitoring, logging, tracking key results, and planning. It's all part of the big idea of how to bring it all together and to be in a DevOps environment. And then finally, and I think that this is such an important part, because you mentioned communications. Organizations that share information can work better together, because a shared goal keeps us working together and make our customers happy. And like we talked about, like toward the beginning, this is all about creating value for our customers, because ultimately our customers are our most important part of the process. And like Donovan says, DevOps is the union of people, process, and products to enable continuous delivery of value to our end users. And so I think that we've really covered a lot of those big ideas today, April. And I was going to give you a chance, if you want. We got about a little less than 5 minutes. If you want to just kind of wrap up and let us know what what we should look to do after we've watched this? What should be my next steps?
Do everything on Azure, automate everything. No, I think there's some great resources out there. We have Microsoft Learn. Again, you mentioned that before. We have the DevOps Lab. We're doing a big infrastructure as code hit right now. We've had HashiCorp on there. We've had NubesGen on there. Pulumi is coming up, and HashiCorp's coming back with some of their other functionalities in Azure. And there's some other cool stuff coming down the pipeline that I can't talk about yet. But yeah, tune into DevOps Lab, read dev blogs. We have myself and Jay putting out stuff of, kind of Jay does his weekly plug of kind of the hot topics in DevOps, and we constantly push stuff that is fairly pertinent. There's also a great library of reference material in dev blogs and the Azure DevOps Lab as well.
Yep, we got the DevOps Resource Center. I think is really a great starting point for you. So let's take a look at our poll for today. Let's see how we did. And so it's a kind of an even split. Some people think it's cultural. Some people think it's technical. Some people think it's both. I'm going to be honest. I'm under the both.
Same.
It's a technical process that you need to implement. It's a cultural shift that your entire company needs to buy in on. And that in itself is just the most important part, is that there's got to be some buy-in, because if you're going to initiate change in an organization, you may need to wear a helmet, because you're going to crash through some walls.
Absolutely.
There's going to be some people who are resistant to change, and that's okay, because ultimately that's creating a understanding of what their concerns are. And so we're talking to one another rather than just throwing things over the wall. And then that, I believe, is going to create a better environment for you, your users, and, like I said, deliver value to your customers.
Absolutely. No, I agree, Jay.
I really do appreciate you being part of this today. I think that I got to learn a little even more about DevOps than I feel like I already knew. I am also looking forward to being on the DevOps Lab soon. I've done a few before. I did a on-prem to the cloud series where we talked about database migrations and migrations in general. I think that the DevOps Lab brings lots of really great relevant information to people, and I love it, and I'm glad to have been part of it and hope to be part of it as well. I continue. So April, how do people find you on the internet if they want to ask you questions?
I'm always welcoming your questions. Please feel free to follow me on Twitter. I'm at the April Edwards. LinkedIn's another way to reach out. I regularly post stuff about technical cool stuff, DevOpsy stuff, sometimes non-DevOpsy stuff. So feel free to reach out on one of those mediums. That's probably the best way to get a hold of me.
Awesome. So April, I just want to say thank you so much. I really do appreciate your time today. And we'll be both next week at Create DevOps here on Learn TV. We're going to be doing a really great number of talks. There's a panel on observability. There's lots of information that we kind of talked about today that you're going to get even more about. And so I can't wait to see you there, April. I know you've worked hard on it. I've worked hard on it. And we're going to put on a great show for everybody.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jay, so much for having me.
No problem. So that's it for us this week. We will catch you in 2 weeks. Next week is Create DevOps. It's on during the time of this show, so we won't be having a live show, but I'll be back. I'm always back. I love being here and doing this for you. So until next time, April, let's give everybody the big wave goodbye. We'll see you next time here on AzureFunBytes. Thanks a lot for joining us.
See you, everyone.